Hi, and welcome to this preview episode of Our World War II Dad. I'm Chris Cangilla alongside my brother Ken Cangilla, and we created this podcast to share some stories about our father, Army Private First Class Louis Cangilla, who served in the European theater during World War II. Now, Ken, you're going to have to act like our expert here. I know you are, because on this podcast, we need some guidance. And over the past few years, I know you've been doing a lot of research about Dad's time overseas. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I have really kind of immersed myself in it as I've gotten older. I very much wanted to understand what he went through, and he passed in 1997, and at that time I was only in my 30s. So I was raising a family. I hadn't delved into his war history that much, although I heard him tell very few and very short stories throughout the years. I never really asked the follow-up questions because I didn't know what to ask even. Well, after he passed, I think then Band of Brothers came out in about 2000. Is that right?
It seems about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that really piqued my interest having watched that series. And I got to thinking, well, what was Dad's world like then? Because I knew he was over there. And so I started digging into it, and I went through his belongings that he had brought back from the war and just little notes and pieces that he had left behind. So I started to piece it together, and it just opened up a whole new world for me. And over the years, I've just dug deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah, you almost became a detective in all those things that you were discovering and showing us all. And we'll get into that a great deal. You know, this limited series podcast that we're putting together is really, like we said, trying to share, who Dad was and what he was doing during the war, and what we can learn about his life during that time, right?
Right, exactly. So, social media was a big help in doing some of that research. But, really what we wanted to do was understand, him as an 18-year-old, enlisting in 1943, and then just kind of review his life from 1943 through the war, coming home from the war, what he did after the war, and then, meeting our mother and starting a family. So a span of about 9 or 10 years.
Yeah, that's what's remarkable to me is that, this all happened within a 10-year, frame. For us, we're 10 years apart. I know I look a little gray and and things aren't, my hairline's going away. But, you and I are 10 years apart. You're a little older at 10 years. But, it was an incredible 10 years that Dad spent before, from enlisting to getting married and starting his family.
Yeah.
Now, it's kind of interesting in a way that, Dad seems to be part of a real world Saving Private Ryan, right?
Yes, in some ways, exactly. In that movie, there were four brothers that had all gone off to war. And of course, three out of the four brothers had died, and there was just the one brother left. So within that framework, in Dad's family, there were five boys in the family. He had four brothers plus himself, so five boys, and he was the youngest boy. And so when he enlisted in 1943, all of his other brothers were already in the military in various branches of the service. So all five of them were serving overseas at the same time. I think two were in the Pacific, and the other three were in the European theater, and in different branches. And there's some interesting stories we'll tell as we go through the podcast about them and their crossroads within that time frame. And then, what was interesting is you've probably seen in some of the movies and things where families, if they had a soldier in the service overseas, they would have a banner in the front window, and it would have 5 blue stars. And then if they lost one of those boys, they would turn that star to gold. So in Dad's family, there's 5 blue stars for the 5 brothers. And then in Saving Private Ryan, I think even in the movie, they show that she's got a banner in the window with 4 blue stars on it. And unfortunately, 3 of those turned gold for her.
Right. Just a little background. I'm in Chicago. You're in Colorado.
Right.
And they have the Gold Star Memorial here, and that is for fallen police officers. So it's the same kind of thing. I think they took that away from the guys that served during the war. So let's transfer back a little bit to our family. Of course, mom and dad got married, and back in those days, shortly after getting married, they decided to start a family. So like we talked about, Ken and I are brothers, and of course we have 4 sisters and 2 other brothers. So kind of like Dad's family, we have a big family as well. And just like you were talking about, I'm the baby. like dad was a baby of his family.
Right. Yeah.
So, with you three older brothers, I feel I would be like dad. If you guys are already over there,
Yeah.
I gotta go. I gotta,
You,
I can't just sit here and watch them fight without me being part of it,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm sure he was chomping at the bit to go because he turned 18 in October of 1943, and by November 15th, he was in the army. So
yeah,
he got right after it. And he'd had a brother that was already in for like 5 years before he even was old enough to get in. So yeah, I'm sure that's the feeling he had. And his brothers, probably like us, were hard on him
yeah,
and
like get over here.
teased him and beat up on him all those younger years. And so I'm sure he wanted to prove himself to them that he could hang with the best.
Right. And you alluded to earlier, dad, we lost dad in 97. And you said you were in your 30s. In 97, I was in my late 20s. We've already done the math with us being 10 years apart, but
Yeah.
it seems like you had an opportunity to spend more time with dad than I really did, as an adult man where you can really connect on a different level.
Yeah.
Do you have some memories of that, that you can share before we get deeper into the main podcast?
Yeah, Dad was always pretty quiet. And I don't know if he was a quiet young man because I've seen some pictures of him having a good time, after the war. And even during the war, there's some pictures where the war was wrapping up and you could tell he was more relaxed. He looked like he enjoyed a good time. But raising a family of 8 kids and him working, all the time, including every other Saturday, he was very pressed for time. And so we didn't get a lot of one-on-one time. But as I got older and had kids, I think we could relate more and more, like I can with my own son now, who's got his first child. And you can kind of see how that transition works. So we got to chat, more and more. And like I said, I didn't press him about the war stuff. But when he did talk about it, he would share a little bit. But it just always struck me that it seemed like he kind of downplayed it.
Yeah.
And in doing my research, I found out that he was in some real tough battles with a real tough troop of guys that he was with that really had some important things to accomplish over there in the European theater.
Yeah, I think it's true. And my research and what I've heard about the greatest generation that did serve is that they don't talk. They don't talk about their experience. Vietnam veterans, they had to talk about it because no one else was, right? So they had to really get that out, and we know a lot more about their endeavors. But
yeah,
I'll tell you what, you were talking about how we, growing up and learning these stories. The story that I remember of Dad, and this is a misnomer. I thought he was always safe because he said that his job was driving around his commanding officer in the Jeep.
Right.
I'm like, well, then you're great. You're in the back, these infantrymen in the front, until someone said, yeah, no, the snipers want to take out the commanding officer.
Right. Yeah.
So Dad wasn't as safe. And I didn't realize that until I was a grown man.
Yeah.
But you know what? Good.
And it's not like he was driving around some general back in Paris. He was up on the front lines and he's driving a colonel around. And I'm not sure what other officers, but I do know there was a Colonel Hansen that he drove around. And they even had a thing called Task Force Hansen, which was the attack group. So, I know he was in the thick of it, and he was in C Company of the 99th Infantry Battalion, which is the proper way to say it is 99th Infantry Battalion separate, because they weren't assigned to any specific Army group. They were kind of a separate unit, and I'll delve into that a little bit more in our future episodes to talk about how they were formed and the Colorado connection on that too, which is kind of ironic. But anyway, yeah, he downplayed it. I think he probably saw more trauma than we expected, and I don't think he was any great hero or anything, but I know that he definitely was in the thick of things in at least 3 major battles.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we grew up in Colorado, but Dad was from Pittsburgh. So there's a Colorado and 99th link, but not a really Pittsburgh link. And that's where Dad's hometown was. So, before we wrap up this preview episode, I want you to share, if you could, just a little bit about what you've been experiencing these past couple of months, because quite frankly, that's what kind of sparked the idea of doing this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm in my 60s now and not getting any younger. So I decided I finally want to make a trip to Europe, and I had never been. And so I planned out this trip to Europe, and part of my goal was to research some of our family history going all the way back to grandfather and great grandfather in Sicily, Italy. So that was part of it. But the other part that was probably one of the bigger parts for me was to walk in the same footsteps that Dad walked in when he was fighting across the European theater in World War II. And after doing my research, I knew these places that he had been. I found a local person who was very well educated in one of the major battles he was in, who was actually my tour guide just because he's so interested in it. And I learned so much from him. And then in addition to following in Dad's footsteps, I was able to see some of the prime areas like Omaha Beach and Carentan and things like that, that Dad wasn't there, but were very significant things that took place. So I really immersed myself in that, took my time to go through Europe and do that. And it really gave new meaning to what he went through, to see the same sights he saw, and gave me new respect for what he had to do, and really admiration for all the men that fought in that war.
Absolutely. And you really, that immersion that you did is what I can't wait to hear about, because we haven't really spoke a lot about your trip. I know you got back a couple of weeks ago,
right? And
so I'll be learning along with our listeners and viewers about this whole thing as we go through it. It's going to be great as we, now together are going to retrace Dad's steps,
Yeah, exactly. And I can't wait to take you through it. It was an experience that I feel like has changed me as to who I am and my relationship with my dad. I regret that when I was younger, I didn't ask him more questions. And so this is a way that I can try to fill in some of those blanks. And God willing, there'll be a day when I can see him again and we can sit down and talk about it.
Yeah, that would be the best outcome of this whole thing, right? So, Ken, I can't thank you enough for kind of doing this with me. It's going to be a fun experience. We'd pick up the phone and talk about this stuff anyway. We'd throw texts at each other about this stuff. So I'm just glad that we're going to record it, have it for future generations to watch, and just really get into the deep part of it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share it with you, and I think you're going to find it very fascinating, not just because it's your dad doing it, but it's such an important piece of history and was a really important time in the lives of our parents. And fortunately, he survived it, met Mom, and here we are today to be able to do this. We
wouldn't be around. There would be no podcast, no story, no us if he didn't return safely. So that's the best outcome for that too. But I really want to thank our viewers. I hope that you are excited as we are to join us on this journey as Ken and I discover, who our World War II dad was. So we'll see you on the next episode of Our World War II Dad. Thanks for watching and listening to Our World War II Dad. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss an episode.
And if you're just listening to the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it.